In addition to setting how shapes are filled in, you can also alter how they are drawn, or in the case of just lines or things that aren't closed shapes, how that line is drawn. And you do that by putting settings on the what's called the stroke, which is how you do the outline of some shape or something that is not a closed shape. So we can demonstrate stroke settings by taking our previous example where we just built some paths, because these paths are fairly complex outlines. And we can set the stroke settings on them. So to remind ourselves of what this looks like, we can run the program and look at the path that is created. I'm going to take this long path, this one here, it goes all the way around, and I want to alter it. And as you can see, there's a very thin black line that's drawn around the outer edge. So the first setting that I want to change is the stroke width. So I can take path dot stroke width, and I'm going to set that, I can set it to a double. I'm going to set that to 15. Okay, and now if we look at that, that is going to draw a very significant line. Now it turns out you can adjust where this line is located, okay, and you can do that by altering the stroke type. Okay, so stroke type can be set to an inside, an outside, or a centered. This is centered, so I'm going to explicitly set it that way. It won't change the drawing. Stroke type equals, and this one happens to be, so stroke type dot centered. We'll make it so it's right on the edge of the shape. If I were to change this to be inside, the entire stroke would appear inside the shape. Outside, the entire stroke would appear outside the shape. I can also change the color that it's drawn in, and I do this just by setting the stroke. Now I could do something like a linear gradient or a radial gradient. There's no point in doing that. I'm going to make this happen, just give it a color, and I'm going to go with blue. Blue, especially with such a broad line, will appear as something, I'm left out the R in stroke. Blue will appear as something other than black, but it's fairly dark, so you'll be able to see features of it. Okay, so we have a stroke width, we have the stroke, the color of it, we have its type, whether it's inside or outside. You can also make your strokes dashed and dotted, and we can do that by setting path dot stroke dash array, which, while that's the name, it doesn't have to be an array. You can set it to any sequence, so a list. Now our stroke is 15 pixels wide, so in order to make this look interesting, I have to pick some fairly broad dashing. So the first number is how long the first chunk of line should be drawn on. The second number is how long it should be kind of turned off. And then on and off and on and off. And you can have whatever pattern you want here. I am going to go with a 40-40-20-20. So what did I type there? So there should be 40 pixels of line, followed by 40 pixels of break, followed by 20 pixels of line, followed by 20 pixels of break. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, so a line, and then a longer break, and then a shorter line, and a short break. But when you look at this, you can clearly tell, okay, that line is definitely longer than that break. And the reason for that is because of how the lines are capped off. So when you have line segments, the next setting that you can put on this is the cap style. So there is a path dot stroke line cap, and the options for that are stroke line cap dot, what we're getting right now is square, so SQARE. As of the time of I'm writing this, these are all in caps, but there's a good chance that this will change over. So in the future, when you're doing this, it'll probably be capital S and lowercase on all the others. That's what we had by default. If I don't want anything, and what that does is it draws basically a square cap on the end whose size is equal to the width. And that's why there was so much more line than there was gap. If I use a cap, a butt type cap, what that does is it just cuts it off right at the end, and it doesn't put any cap on there. And so if we run that, this looks more like what we were expecting. So there's 40 pixels of followed by 40 pixels of no line, followed by 20 pixels of line, followed by 20 pixels of no line. Okay, so this looks like what we might have been expecting as you went around. The other setting for this is to do a round cap. And as the name implies, instead of being a little square stuck to the end, this is going to be a half circle stuck to the end, which once again it has a radius equal to half of the width of the stroke. And so you can see it's kind of closed in a little bit of these gaps and rounded things off a little bit. The other setting that we can play with is how when lines join up at corners, how that is handled. And that is done with the stroke line join. So path dot stroke line join. The settings in here are all stroke line join dot. What we were seeing previously is what's called a miter join. And the miter join takes and makes points larger. And I think to actually help us see this, I am going to bring that corner back just a little bit. So let's look at this now. I pulled in this corner so that it's basically the edge of the shape is right about where the tip of my mouse is, and you can see it shoots off over here in this pointed end. Okay, so that's a miter join. That's not a join that you can have. There are two others. The miter join, you can use a bevel join, and once again, right now these are all caps. There's a good chance that by the time you're writing this, it'll be capital first letter and then everything else lowercase. The bevel just cuts off on there, so you can see over on this corner it just does a cutoff. Here it does the cutoff as well. And then the last type is round. And in the library that I'm using, it is again all caps. And so a round join, as you would expect, kind of puts a semicircle ending on it. Okay, so those are the different settings. Turns out there's two others that I haven't gone into. One is the miter limit. You can set out this point is allowed to go. And then there's also a dash offset, so that you can take wherever the kind of start of the shape is, you can change how far these dashed lines go. A fun thing to do would be to make it so every time you click, you increment that, and then you could make the dashed lines walk around the edge of your shape. So you could do some interesting effects there, but we've covered the basics, which allow you to change your stroke, alter its color, do the dashing, set its width, and change how things join up and what the edges of the lines look like.